Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? We're recording this video today because I think it is that important. I want to thank Dr. Zanotti for agreeing to give us his talk today on lean ICU. And when I was thinking about how I should introduce his talk, I thought a number of different options were okay. But the best is just to be honest with you. And being honest with you might be kind of alarming. So we are all focused on the cost crisis in healthcare right now. The Affordable Care Act has shined a bright light on the problems of costs, and specifically in hospitals where the highest cost medical care is provided. So I had a meeting recently with our CEO, and all of the heads of service lines and divisions had meetings with the CEO. And the question that was posed to all of us is, how are we going to cut expenses right now in 2013? And many of the groups had no other option but to offer up positions, people, salary lines, cut programs maybe. I didn't take that approach because I had access to some data, which Dr. Zanotti is going to show to you in this talk, that shows that those things would just be a drop in the bucket compared to the opportunity that actually exists in eliminating waste in our clinical practice, because our cost structure is so high in the critical care environment. And at the same time, there's opportunity to improve the care, improve the quality. And so what I offered up to our CEO was not a position or a program, but rather a practice for lean transformation, which is what Dr. Zanotti is going to talk about today.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the introduction. And I think that we're going to hear a lot about cost and waste today, but the important point I want to make is that a lean ICU really is about value and adding value to our stakeholders and making actually our patient outcomes better, but also creating value for our other stakeholders. And even though our main customers are our patients, we have a lot of internal and external customers that we also want to provide the best value possible. So in the next 40 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the healthcare environment right now. I'm going to talk about the principles of lean and what it really is and maybe what it's not, and also talk about the types of waste that are prevalent not only in healthcare but in every type of a production or service endeavor that we have. And finally, I'm going to introduce the idea of the lean ICU, which is really what we're trying to get at today as a starting point for the transformation we want to have in our practice. So in other words, I'll talk about the why, I'll tell you the what, and then we'll talk about the who and the when at the end. In case you haven't been aware, healthcare is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. I mean, obviously, as Dr. Trzeciak pointed out, Obamacare or the Affordable Health Care Act is one of those changes, but there's a lot of other things that are going on at the same time in healthcare and that are really very, very relevant to not only our practice in 2013, but more importantly, I think, for our future in the next 5 and 10 years. Nobody can predict exactly what these changes will be, but I think there are some clear trends that we need to identify, and we really want to be proactive instead of reactive. And I think a great example that Steve provided is that getting rid of programs, firing people is being reactive. We want to do more than that and be proactive and really get, to where we can make a significant impact, not only in cost, like I said, but more importantly in value for our patients. And we'll talk about that a little bit and define that. So I think that for many, many years, and especially true in academic centers, which is the only environment that I've really worked in, we've been very centered on physicians. I think one of the biggest problems that academic physicians have is that for many, many years, they have been convinced that they are the customers. And everything that we do really kind of will be around our time, our needs, and we're not putting the patient's needs or our other customers' needs in front and creating value for them. And that's true for everything in healthcare. We design our hospitals around the healthcare providers and not around the needs of the patients. And that's changing. Now we're trying to become patient-centered, and even though you hear that a lot, we need to recognize that that's a true need because patients are becoming much more savvy, and they want to know, what are you doing, or what value are you providing me? And the value from their perspective might be maybe different from what we think is valuable for them. So that's very important. The second big problem, I think, in healthcare is that we live and still live in silos. And that, as you'll see, is a very important aspect of what we want to eliminate. So everybody's very concerned with their silo. We don't talk to each other. And that not only creates a lot of waste, but I think it also decreases value for our system and for our patients. So everybody tries to fix their little shop, but they really don't try to look at the bigger picture and how can we integrate our changes to the whole healthcare system, and more importantly, how can we integrate our changes to what's valuable for our patients. And we're really trying to get to work as teams. Now, I would submit to you that the word team is often thrown around, and very commonly thrown around in the ICU. Well, I'm telling you right now, we are not a team. We're a working group, and we work together around the patients. But if we truly want to become a team, we have to have a unity of purpose, we have to be accountable to each other, and we really, really have to work in a different way. And I think that with the changes that are coming, that not only I think is best for our patients, but I think is an imperative for our survival. And finally, the cost structure, which is, and how we get paid, is changing. So for many years, medicine in the United States has been a fee-for-service endeavor. And I think that in critical care, that many times might mean do more, see more. Well, that's changing very rapidly, and I think that all the physicians are very acutely aware of that. And now we're really moving into an era of pay for performance or pay for value. And as you'll see, this might be a very, very critical time for critical care, because an opportunity for us to do something really, really special is there because of how we're going to be looking at what we provide and how we get paid in the future. So these are just some of the things that I think are changing very rapidly, but I think that fall very nicely into some of my discussion. Value in healthcare is really, if you want to choose one definition, it's better outcomes at lower cost. So I think what's important to recognize is that the better outcomes is what we really want as physicians. But because of what the environment we live in, we'll have to deliver that at lower cost. And I think that, as you'll see, when we talk about the types of waste, we have delivered healthcare in the United States, maybe with some good outcomes, but a very high cost that is probably unnecessary and exceedingly wasteful. And we will try to change that over the next several years by what we do here at Cooper. Low value care, on the other hand, is when waste, measured as the use of resources, measured as financial expenditures, errors, or patient harm, exceed the clinical benefits. And we see that every day in our practice. Yet we're not doing anything to really change that and fix that. And I think that's something that we need to realize, that not only is important for our patients, but if we provide low value care, guess what? We're not going to get paid. We will have to provide high value care in order to get paid in the future, and we need to fix this now before it's too late. So I introduced the concept of waste, and I think that it's very interesting when we look at what happens in healthcare systems. So this is actually a study that was published in Bloomberg report, and it was ranking healthcare systems by efficiency. Now, there's always obviously specifics about the methodology that you need to understand, but in general, what they did is they looked at countries that had more than 5 million population, had a life expectancy over 70, and had a GDP of over 5,000. And they looked at those countries, and they looked at the life expectancy, the relative per capita cost of healthcare, and the absolute per capita cost of healthcare. So this is in percent to GDP, and this is in terms of how much you spend total. And they basically weighted these in different ways, and then they ranked the healthcare systems from 1 to 10. Now, what you might see is that the United States is not even in the top 10. So based on this methodology, the United States was actually 46 out of 48 nations in terms of the efficiency of healthcare. Now, I think that this is a wake-up call, and I think it's a great little burst in the bubble of American exceptionalism, thinking that we do things wonderfully. And I think that we need to confront the data and say, well, whether this is true or not, we're not doing very well, and what we can do about it. And I think that's very important. And one of the things that you'll learn is that as we try to implement a lean culture, you need humility, because you will see things that you have been doing very, very wrong, and you have to accept that. But the key is to see what we can do to change that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is actually a fascinating article published in JAMA last year. that again talks about waste in our healthcare and the amount of money that we're throwing away. And this is obviously extremely relevant when we talk about the Affordable Care Act. I think that as physicians, ethically, we would believe strongly that universal health care is an imperative in a nation like ours. Yet, all these cost issues are preventing us from delivering that. So this is one of those studies that looks at what we spend now in terms of percent of expenditures, percent of GDP. This is what's happening right now. If we were to stay exactly where we are, the growth in national health care expenditures would match the GDP growth. We already spend the most of our GDP in health care without getting the best results, so that's already a problem. But here you have different types of inefficiencies or wastes from a monetary standpoint in the healthcare system. Fraud and abuse, pricing failures, administrative complexity, over-treatment, tremendous problem in our practice. Failures of care coordination, we see this every day. Failures of care delivery, and if we keep doing business as usual, right, and we don't change things, this is where we're going to end up in 20 years. This is horrible. And I think that it really, really sets us on a scary path, and something needs to be done about that. Put in another way, right now, several studies, including estimates from different congressional budget analysis, suggest that as of 2013, we are spending $1 trillion of our healthcare expenditures in waste. $1 trillion spend it in waste. And if you were to quantify that in a different way, for every dollar we spend in healthcare in the United States, 40 to 50 cents is wasted. Now, we have to do better than that. And I think that the solution is not going to come from Washington. The solution has to come from us, from the physicians. And everybody has to do their part to really start recognizing this as a real part, because it affects us and it affects our patients. So let's talk about what happens in healthcare systems. How do healthcare systems work? Well, there's definitely, functions, which are the reasons why patients come to us or our customers, and that includes access, emergent care, surgical care, medical care, guest services, other functions. We have resources, physical resources, human resources, and digital resources. And I would suggest that for most of my time here and for most healthcare systems, we spend a lot of time thinking of how can we market our functions and how can we make them appealing to our patients. And we also always think that the solution is, either way, is in the resources. So if we need to cut cost, eliminate resources. If we need to increase capacity, increase resources. We need to operate more, we need more ORs. And the reality is, though, that the key component of this whole system are the processes. And every patient who comes in through the ED and leaves after having their care goes actually through a latitude of processes, none of which are standardized, none of which are efficient. And that's really where the key is. Now, we're not inventing the wheel here. There are other centers that have identified this and have started focusing on the processes. For example, this is the Bellevue Clinic and Surgery Center in Seattle Children's Hospital. So there, they designed this facility based on lean concepts. They took all the stakeholders involved before they even set the first block in this building. They were able to build this $30 million under budget. And by implementing a series of processes and improving their process on a regular basis, their non-operative time is 50% lower than the benchmark and 55% lower than their sister campus, which is the main campus in the Children's Hospital. Their operations start on time, 99% of the time. And the patient satisfaction is over 90%. Over 90% rate the experience as a 10 out of 10. Very, very interesting. So if they could do it, why can't other people do it? This is Theta Care Health System, which I've never heard about till I started getting interested in this topic a couple of years ago. It's a private hospital in Wisconsin. They've gone through a transformation. Their inpatient care total cost was reduced over 3 years by 25%. That's a fourth of their cost. Their patient satisfaction is 5 out of 5, nearly 100% of the time for the last 3.5 years. And their medication errors in the last 5 years have been 0. If they can do it, in Wisconsin, why couldn't we do it here? Finally, this is just showing you another type of practice, which is an ENT outpatient practice. And over 1 year, one of the things that they implemented was a daily huddle, among other processes. And basically, every day before they start, all the staff does a daily huddle, and they review the problems from the day before. They anticipate problems for today, and they come up with solutions, and everybody participates. So in 1 year, their wait time for first appointment was down by 28%. So that's like increasing your patient population by 30% immediately. Your capacity for surgical procedures increased by 10% without building one new OR, without having to hire more people, without having to get more capital investment. And their patient satisfaction has steadily keep rising. So what do all these healthcare systems have in common? Well, what they have in common is they adopted a methodology or a cultural transformation that in great part is based on what people know as the Toyota way or the Toyota production system. So let me tell you a story about this gentleman. This is E.G. Toyota. He died actually in September of this year after 100 years. And he was really a visionary. And he didn't invent this, but by observing what other people were doing and taking principles proposed initially by Deming, he was able to transform a small car company. And I'll tell you the story of E.G. Toyota. In 1950, he came to the United States. This is after the Second World War. The Japanese economy was not in great shape. They were trying to rebuild. And he came and asked if he could do an internship at Ford Motor Company, the biggest automaker in the world at that time. And of course, I mean, the people at Ford said, well, we'll let the little guy come and see how awesome we are. So he spent 3 months in Ford and basically saw everything they did, every production line, everything. And it's kind of legendary that he would go around with a little notebook and would write stuff in Japanese all the time and talk very little, but ask a lot of questions. And he noticed two things. Number one, there's a tremendous amount of waste, errors, excess parts, problems in the production line. And more importantly, he noticed that the management was never in the production line, and the people who actually did the work did not have a voice. So he went back and started thinking about these things and started with this whole idea of Kaizen, which is small improvements, small changes to improve things. But he really took it to heart to make sure that every process in Toyota was evaluated and that the people who did the process were the ones who gave the solution. So he started applying a scientific method to really a continuous process change. And what happened was remarkable. In 1950, Toyota had produced a total of 3,500 cars, a total of 3,500 cars when he went to Ford. At that time, the Ford Motor Company was producing 7,000 cars per day. So they could produce more cars in a day than Toyota could produce in their existence. It took him 15 years to make this one of the largest companies in the world and 20 years to make Toyota the largest car company producer in the world. And it really transformed the way they did their things. And it really, I mean, shows that when you apply a system and you really change the culture, you can really, really achieve amazing things. So there's two jobs at Toyota. You do your work, and you figure out how to improve your work. Our biggest problem in healthcare is that we don't think about how to improve our work. We get around stuff to finish our work. So I think a great example of this is Epic. We've had Epic for over 3 years now. Every single person I know complains about Epic. Nobody's done anything to change it. And what people do is every single one of us has a different method to get around the inefficiencies of Epic to get our workflow done. Right? So Dr. Gerber sits in the office, I go to my office, Dr. Lotano runs around with her iPad, but we don't have a common way of addressing the real problem and make it work for all of us. Well, at Toyota, that would not be acceptable. Toyota gets over 2,000 suggestions from their employees every year of things to change, every year. And according to what they reported, over 95 of these things are implemented. So they give the people who do the work not only a voice, but tell me how can I fix this? And usually the people who do the work have great ideas. So what's a lean healthcare system? So it's an organizational, cultural commitment to applying the scientific method to designing, performing, and continuously improving the work delivered by teams, leading to measurably better value for patients. This is not a fad. This is not a quick fix. This is not a prescription. It's basically using methods that we believe in, but applying them to everything that we do. And it puts everything on the table, and it really empowers the people who do the work to figure out the solutions with a methodology to get there. So anybody who starts a lean enterprise should understand this is not going to be short, it's going to be hard, And it's not a destination, but a journey. But what it really means is that we don't know how to fix things. But with these methods, we eventually figure out what works best for us here at Cooper. So my dream, and Dr. Trzeciak's dream, and a lot of people, is that soon here at Cooper and in our ICU, everybody will have two jobs. One is to do their work, and the other one is to improve the work so we can improve patients' care. So let's talk about the principles of lean. And I think this is very important just to understand. I mean, there's 6 principles that really guide what we do. And when people deviate from these principles, you can realize why sometimes these enterprises fail. So the first one is that it's an attitude of continuous improvement. So all we're doing is fanatically applying the Deming or the PDSA cycle, scientific method. You plan, you do, you study, and you act. So it's nothing different than we would do for a randomized study. We have we see what the current state is. We have a hypothesis of how we can make it better. We implement that, and then we compare it. And if it does work better, we implement it. What's very important, though, in lean is that once you identify your current condition and you improve it, your target condition becomes the current condition. So you never end. You can always improve something. But the idea really of Kaizen is to do it in small increments, to always be identifying what can I do here, what can I do there. And a lot of times it's fascinating how small changes can make a tremendous difference. And I have a story that maybe I'll share with you at the end. But I think that can be illustrated in multiple examples, not only in healthcare, but also in industry. Lean is value creating. This is very important. Again, we have to recognize who are our customers. What is valuable for them, not for us. Like I said before, I think that a problem that we've had in medicine for a long time is that we create all our processes around ourselves, the healthcare providers, but we really don't listen to the customers and what's valuable for them. So a way of defining value is that it has to meet 3 criteria for an intervention or a piece of a process to add value or be what we call value add for our stakeholder. It has to transform the process or the product. The customer has to be willing to pay for it, and it has to be done the right time. There can't be a mistake. Very common that we see this all the time in medicine. So I just put the patient here because they're our core stakeholder and our core customer, but I also want you to think about our other customers. When I am rounding, the fellows are my customers. The residents are my customers. The nurses are my customers. CT surgery, they're my customers. So the families are my customers. So we have to really start understanding what creates value in the processes that we do every day for those people. Now, I keep coming back to the patient because ultimately the reason why we're here is to take care of patients. And that should be our #1 priority in terms of creating value for the patient. So what's waste? Anything that does not add value is waste. And in what we do in medicine, I would probably say very comfortably that 90% of what we do is waste. And that's just a reality. And I mean, people have looked at this, and I'll show you some examples, and I think you'll start identifying different types of waste and say, that's probably true. So lean is unity of purpose. And this is just showing you one institution that has gone through a lean transformation, and they obviously care very much of safety, people, financial stewardship, and quality. For each one, they have a couple of metrics. Their ultimate goal is the customer or the patient. But what it means is that we all are pulling for the same things. So that's what makes a team a true team. We're accountable to each other. We have the same purpose. So I think that it's no good to have like 1,000 metrics, and the nursing staff follows these metrics, we follow these metrics, RT follows a whole bunch of other metrics. No. Everybody should be on the same page. What are our key metrics? And everybody should be accountable to each other to achieve those. And that's really something that's very difficult to obtain, but I think that once you get there, it makes a tremendous difference in how you run your operation. Lean is respect for the people who do the work. And I think that I've heard, I mean, especially in some academic centers, people talk about Lean and Six Sigma, especially about Lean, which I'm more seeing right now, and saying, oh, it just creates dissatisfaction. And that's exactly because they don't understand. The only people who criticize stuff like this is people who have failed or people who don't know anything about it. But when you talk with people who have implemented it, the first thing that they always tell you is that once the employees or once the people who do the work get their voice listened and get an opportunity to show that they can actually provide solutions, they're tremendously invested. The problem that we have right now is that we usually dictate from up, prescribe how to do things. and that doesn't work. The solutions have to come from the front lines and as a team and following a methodology. So it's really respecting everybody who does the work and understanding that they probably know better than you, whether you're the chief manager for the nurses or the chief of the division or the chief of the department. People in the front line probably know better what the problems are and what the solution is. So you better get them involved. Lean is visual. And obviously, I think a lot of you recognize that I'm a very visual person. But I think that it's fascinating how there's so many things that we do that we don't visualize, right? So this is actually a process map of a patient coming into a theta care from the time they get to the hospital to their discharge. And it has every single thing that goes on. So not only it's visual in terms of trying to identify the current state, but also helps you identify where the waste is and how you can improve it. And now you have a new state, you process it again, and you keep looking at it. But also, it's visual in terms that everybody should be aware of what the metrics are and how we're doing. It should be displayed everywhere. So that's why you only need a couple of very critical displays, but everybody should be aware of that. And I think a great example of a lean concept that we probably applied in the ICU without thinking of it as a lean concept is the infection rate with our catheters. You walk into the ICU and you see 122 days without an infection. Everybody knows that that's an important metric, and that's been 124 days without an infection. So the hope is that when it says 1 day without an infection, everybody says, what happened? How did this happen? How can we make it better? But everybody has to be involved. Finally, lean is flexible regimentation. This is a word that Dr. Toussaint has coined, and it's regimented because you have to develop a standard process for performing a specific service based on the best available evidence. And right now, I think one of the biggest problems we have in medicine in general, but also in our ICU, is that most of our standards, if not all of them, most of our processes, if not all of them, are not standardized. But standardized, that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell you how to do things. It's using a methodology, figure out based on the available evidence, based on what our customers think is valuable, creating value. You standardize the process, everybody does it the same way, and then you can start identifying ways to keep making it better, keep making it better. But you have to start by standardizing a lot of these principles and processes, and it's flexible because you have to understand that perfection is not attainable. So you're always going to be able to change your process and with slow improvements make it better every time. And I think that's also something that's very important. This is a great quote that Donald Berwick, a previous Medicare medicine, CMS head, had last year at the IHA forum. He said that the reduction of waste is the quality dimension of our time. In very large measure, improving care and reducing waste are one and the same thing. So he has recognized that eliminating waste not only will create value for our customers, as you'll see, but it also will help change and transform our healthcare system. And we are the ones who have to implement that change. It's not going to come from elsewhere. So I think it's time for us to take that responsibility. So what I wanted to do in the next couple minutes is share with you the types of waste. This has been identified many years ago. And again, it was a very important point for the production, to get our production system. But these are kind of types of waste that are agreed and that are prevalent in business, that in a factory that produces a car, or in a system that has complex processes and knowledge processes, such as providing healthcare services in a hospital. And what's important is not that you identify a waste and put it in the right bucket. What's important is that you start looking around yourself and identifying what's waste and think about how you can change it. So there's 8 types of waste: overproduction, waiting, extra processing, motion, inventory, transportation, defects, and underutilization. And I want to talk a little bit more about these, give you one case scenario, but I'll try to relate it not to building cars and building phones, but to taking care of patients. So overproduction, too much too early. Probably overproduction is one of the #1 wastes in medicine today. How many people who have back pain get an MRI when they don't need that? So anything that you produce more than is needed, faster than is needed, or duplicate effort is clearly waste. So let's think about just MRIs. How many patients get MRIs when they don't need it? #1. How many patients had an MRI somewhere else but not got transferred, and because we don't access the medical records, the system's kind of broken, we order a new MRI? There's other types of waste. If you spike IV bags before you're going to use them, and you have to throw them away. That's waste. If you get things too fast when you're not ready for them, that's waste. But I think that in terms of overproduction, doing too much is a problem. Does everybody really need a Chem 7 every day, twice a day? Do we really need x-rays every day? So these are things that we have to start thinking, because the problem we have in medicine is that we keep doing things because that's the way we did it before. And 90% of the time we have no idea why it started like that. So we have to start to analyze these processes to see where's the waste and how can I change it. Waiting. And I think everybody who's been a patient identifies this. Waiting, right? How much time do you spend when you go to any healthcare appointment and just wait? So I actually quantified this not too long ago, and I'm usually very sharing with all my medical dilemmas. Everybody knows this. But a couple weeks ago, I was in flutter again. So I had to go and get either cardioverted or get paste out of it. And I went to CHOP, which is where I usually go for my care because of my congenital issues. And I actually was there for 5 hours, 35 minutes of which was actually valuable to me. 5 hours, 35 minutes of which actually they did something to me that I was willing to pay, and you did it right. So it makes you think about, now maybe 35 minutes is unreal, but couldn't they cut that by half? So now we're talking about 2.5 hours, right? So everywhere you go, you see waste, and it's not the people. It's the process. It's the system. You can put great people in a bad process, you're going to get bad results. You can put okay people in a great process, you're going to get great results. Waiting could also happen on our line. How many times the fellows are going to do a procedure and they're in the middle of something and they need something, and they have to wait for that? Or they're ready to do an operation and the coags are not there. They have to wait for the coags. All that is waste, and it really, does not add value. Extra processing. So any unnecessary step, steps that or extra effort that does not add value. How many times do you think we check the same things in patients and we still don't get the family history right? Dr. Gerber, is that correct? So much of our, or somebody comes to the ED, how many times do they ask for the same information? That's not even medical, right? That's just extra processing, and from the patient's perspective, it's waste. Motion, this is my favorite one, and I think that the nurses in the room will love this example I'm going to give them in a second. So excess motion, any movement of people or product that does not add value to a service is waste. So this is a fascinating case study. This was actually done in Virginia Mason in Seattle. They were very interesting to understand what their nurses did actually with their time when they were, and this is in a specific ward. So they actually spent a serious time just observing them. That's another very, very, very important lean principle, that you kind of go and observe what happens at the Gemba, which is like the workshop. And they actually mapped what every nurse was doing in their shift. And they realized that over a third of their time was wasted in motion, going from room to room, going to look for stuff that they needed. And really they figured out that just doesn't make sense. It's 35% of their time. We have to do something different. So they implemented 2 interventions. They standardized the stock of supplies in each patient room. So if you go to any room in this ward, you open the drawers, and everything that is considered the most important things that they would need on a most frequently is in the same exact place, and it's always stocked. And it's all visual. So it's all color-coded, and you know when you need more. But you basically go to any room, and you open things, and everything's in the same place, right? And they changed the system for assigning the nurse assignment of patients, and to create a system that took into account very seriously geography as well. This is not an ICU, this is a regular floor. So basically, what they found is that the current state, before they made the interventions, per shift, each nurse was taking 10,000 steps on average. So they were walking 5 miles per shift. 5 miles. They implemented the interventions, and then they rechecked everything, and they were able to bring that down to 1,200 steps, or 0.6 miles. With those 2 small changes. They didn't have to bring more nurses, they didn't have to build more rooms. And basically, you say, well, that's pretty impressive, but what does it mean in terms of money? Well, the productivity they gained was equivalent to 20 nurses doing a 12-hour shift per day. More than $4 million in productivity was gained per year, And they decreased the cost by not paying overtime or temporary labor by $500,000 in 1 year. So just think about this is just changing one process, looking at one aspect of waste, and the impact they had was unbelievable. More importantly, what they found is that the nurses were much happier. The patients were much happier because they had 33% more of face time with their nurse now, basically. And the nurses thought that they were doing much more valuable work. So think about the poor nurse today in bed 15, the corner of our ICU. They need to get something that's down in our supply room. Let's say they go and get it. They come back, then they realize that the other thing that they needed is not there either. You have to walk. So that's a tremendous amount of waste. And there's ways that, obviously, if you're really fanatical about this, you design your ICU around these concepts. Now, we didn't do that because we weren't doing that thing, but there's still things that you can do to change that and try to create small increments of improvement that have tremendous impacts on productivity, but also on patient satisfaction. And again, you're not spending money, right? If you could do this, I'm sure that everybody would be like, wow, and it can happen. So other types of waste, inventory. So having unnecessary supplies that do not support the just-in-time usage and delivery. So the way we kind of do things doesn't make a lot of sense. We actually have all these the stockpiles. When we need something, it's not there. Sometimes things that are very expensive get expired. So really, there's ways of creating your inventory so it's just in time. So it's always available when you need it, and you don't let things expire. And that just creates a tremendous amount of savings and cost, but it also decreases extra movement of inventory. And it's very interesting how, if you think of, and there might be other reasons for this, but I guess a great example is car dealerships. So if you go to a car dealership in the United States, you basically usually have these huge car dealerships with tons of cars parked. So that's all wasted inventory. They're just waiting for somebody to buy them. If you go to a car dealership, a Toyota car dealership in Japan, they have a couple of cars, each model, so you can try them, and then you tell them what you want, and they'll deliver it to you in your house in a couple of days. So once you order your car, it goes to the factory, and boom, it's done. So it's kind of just in time trying to do that. Now, the way we're designed, it's obviously very different, so we kind of have these tremendous amounts of stock. But think about medications. Something like fomepizole, extremely expensive. So if you don't have a system or a process to really take care of that, what's going to happen is you're going to buy all this fomepizole, and you're not going to use it. It's going to expire, and you're just throwing money down the drain. So you have to figure out ways with your suppliers to really have a process that you know when you need something, but it's always available when it's required, and it's not wasted. Transportation, moving work around. Unnecessary movement of information, products, materials, or patients. So let's suppose one of our heart patients. How many times is a heart patient moved in this hospital? They come in, they get registration, they're taken to pre-op, they go to surgery, they come to the ICU, they go to the CICU, they go to the PCU, they have a problem, there's no rooms in the ICU, so they go to the CCU, then they get better, they go back to the PCU, right? God forbid there's another problem, now they come to the ICU. Just think about it. Now, clearly all that movement is waste, and it's not designed around the patient's needs. It just shows the inefficiencies of how we designed our hospital. Now, perhaps we can't change everything here at Cooper because we're not going to build a new hospital, but just so you know, there are cardiac surgery units that basically have a universal bed. So you go to surgery, you come to that bed, and when you're ready to go home, you get discharged. So that's patient-centered. If I'm a patient, that's what I want. That's what I really want. And how do you get there, I think, is very important. But just recognizing that this is waste, and how can we improve it? Defects are actually one that's very common in medicine and that I think we're all aware of. So creating errors. So services, products, or processes that do not meet the customer requirements. So for example, leaving an instrument post-surgery, I can assure you, does not meet the customer's requirement, right? But more importantly, it's poor quality. It creates additional rework, going back to the OR, opening the patient again. It increases cost for the institution. It's lost revenue, and that will be even worse now when we start getting paid for performance, because if we have complications, they're going to take money away from us. It's poor patient satisfaction, right? And more importantly, from our perspective as physicians and healthcare providers, it just leads to poor patient outcomes. So how can it be that somebody gets amputated on the wrong side? That's not the surgeon's not a bad surgeon necessarily. It's not anesthesia's fault. It's the process is broken. So identifying that type of waste is also very, very important. And finally, I think a very important one is gender utilization, which is not only unused talent in terms of your employees, but unused resources. So, and Dr. Fish might be acutely, obviously, aware of this. There's always complaints about the utilization of the ORs. So the solution is not to build more ORs. The solution is to identify processes that eliminate waste and make the ORs available at a better rate. And I think that is very, very important. There's institutions that have worked on this, and there's this one clinic I read about, this actually Virginia Mason, where they looked at what they called the turnover time. So from the time you apply dressings to the patient who's in the first case to the time you cut the next patient, and they were able to reduce that by almost 70%, just by eliminating waste and looking at the process, without having to invest more in their facility. So there's ways to do that. And then obviously there's also underutilized talent, and I think that this is a very important concept of lean. The people in this room have solutions that we're not utilizing. And you might not even know that you have the solutions. So if you really tap on these resources, you slowly can start transforming your practice by using that resource to your benefit. What are some common causes or common themes in the causes of all these waste types of waste? Poor communication between internal and external customers. So for example, we see this all the time. When we get a transfer, we don't really have good communication with people who transferred. We overdo things. We don't communicate with our own people who see us here. Silos. So people are much more interested in local optimization versus value stream optimization. So instead of trying to see how can we change this Epic thing that I do, why don't we try to look at how we can change Epic for everybody? Now, part of what we're saying today is local optimization, but because we're going to start in the ICU, that's what we control. But what's important is that you not only look at the process from the ICU perspective, but you look at the process from the patient's perspective and their whole hospital stay. So when we do this, how does it affect other people, and how do we make it better for everybody? That's the key. And we're all about breaking silos. I mean, I think we talk about disciplinary ICU, but the reality is that still in 2013, we live in silos, especially the physicians, and we need to understand that we're all here to take care of patients, and we should really work as one team, which is to be the healthcare providers. Misalignment between providers and patients. So a lot of times there's a misalignment between what we perceive that is important for us and what the patients perceive. There's a tremendous misalignment right now of how we get paid as physicians versus what the healthcare system wants. We get paid by service, and they want us to do less but get better outcomes. So that's contradictory, and it's going to change very quickly. Lack of standardized processes, again, a tremendous problem. Nothing we do is standardized to the extent that it should be. And I think that that really applies for every process that we're involved with. And I think we're all guilty, but the good news is that if we start working on it, we have a lot of room for improvement and can really make tangible differences very, very quickly. And finally, poor design of the workplace. Workplaces are not designed really paying attention to elimination of waste and really paying attention to the stakeholders. So the nurses, the physicians who work there, the patients, their families. So some people are a little bit better about that, but if you're really going to be rigid about this and really do it well, you really design a place around all those stakeholders, and you design it by looking at a value stream map that tells you what the patient's going to go through and how can you eliminate waste. And there is not one single unit in this hospital that is designed in that way. None. And it's just true for most healthcare hospitals, unfortunately. So finally, in the last 5 minutes of my talk, I just want to talk about the who and the when. So I presented to you a problem. I presented to you what a lot of people in healthcare now believe is a solution. And it's not necessarily the utilization of lean methodology, but the elimination of waste. And one way to get there is by using a lean methodology. And I want to talk about what we're going to do here at Cooper and what we really think of. So I'm going to share with you 2 slides that were presented to our executive the executive director committee not too long ago from an external consultant that looked at opportunity in our healthcare. And there are 2 very important aspects of opportunity, and the faculty will hear more about this from Steve in our faculty meeting. But basically, when you look at opportunity for length of stay, so potentially avoided days, and I'm not going to go into details, what you can really identify very quickly is that right here we have 5,000 potentially avoidable days. 5,000 potentially avoidable days. And if you look at the DRGs, these are prolonged mechanical ventilation. Now, not all these patients are in our ICU, but these are definitely DRGs that we own. So the highest opportunity for length of stay is on patients that we are responsible for. People in the INCU, people in the ICU. What about cost? So this is opportunity for cost. And again, there's all these DRGs. If you look at the two highest DRGs, again, ECMO, tracheal, mechanical ventilation for 96 hours, trach, mechanical ventilation for 96 hours. The two biggest buckets are things that we own. $20 million in opportunity to reduce cost. So firing an intensivist or two intensivists, getting rid of nurses is nothing. Moving this needle 10%, that's huge. 20%, it's amazing. And the absolute number, we could argue about that, but it doesn't matter. The opportunity is tremendous, and we should be really focusing on how can we become more efficient to improve our outcomes, but also to reduce this cost. So what is the Cooper Lean ICU? So right now, it's really nothing more than a dream. But what we believe would make us a Lean ICU is a commitment to the application of scientific method to design, perform, and continuously improve the work delivered by our team with the objective of creating maximal value for our patients. So I'll say that again. A commitment to the application of the scientific method to design, perform, and continuously improve the work delivered by our team with the objective of creating maximal value for our patients. So that's what we want to get. Now, we're not going to get there overnight. We're not going to be able to tell you how to do it. We have methods that can help us get there, but it really is it's a journey, and it's a transformation of the way we think and the way we work every day. And we think that everybody in this room is going to be part of that. We started by trying to get the fellows on board. So we started with this Kaizen idea board in order for them to do their to meet their ACGME requirements of performance improvement. And this is just a simple idea, and it's a tool. And Jason sent me an update yesterday, and we're moving forward, and I'll show you how. But basically, the reason why I show it is because this is specifically for an ACGME requirement, but I think it ties into what we're trying to do. And we're going to try to teach the fellows some methods, work on certain things. But what this Kaizen idea board basically does is it pulls from some of those concepts I talked about earlier. So it's very visual. So it's in the call room. That's the ping pong room. Everybody can see it. And as we progress or fail, everybody will be aware of what's going on. It involves the people who are doing the work. They're coming up with problems, and then based on that, we're creating teams so they can work on those problems. And as you progress, and it also just uses basically a PDSA cycle, which is just a scientific method. So as you progress, eventually you start populating the completed, and that's when you start really feeling that you're starting to move in the right direction. So the idea is that you start with a whole bunch of ideas, then you choose the projects you're going to work on, and then eventually you have a whole bunch of completed projects. So as of now, we're in the first phase where all the fellows have submitted ideas. We're still trying to get more ideas. The next phase is to select from those ideas 2 or 3 high-yield projects, and there's a method to try to identify that high yield and then get people working on it. So that's the first step, and I think it involves really the fellows. I think the nurses also might have a Kaizen board, but really trying to move this forward, I mean, for the ICU eventually is going to be very important. But again, it's just a simple method, but it really just kind of unifies some of those concepts I talked about earlier. And the next step, which I think is a more ambitious step, and it's going to require a lot of help from everybody, is to tackle ICU rounds. So I think that we all recognize that it's a critical part of our daily activity. We also recognize that it's tremendously variable. It's not standardized. It's absolutely not designed around true value for our customers, whether it be the patients or the learners or the nurses. And I think that clearly it has to change. So Lean's not going to tell us what those rounds will look like, but Lean will provide us tools and a method to map out the current state, to identify the waste, to think about what's valuable for our customers and who are our customers during rounds, and to come up with solutions from the people in this room of how we can make it better. The attendings, the fellows, the residents, the nurses, RT, etc. And then we will come up with a standard, and we'll say this is what we want to do. And we will get everybody on board to start doing that. It won't happen overnight, but I think that if we take the solutions from the people involved, we're at a very good point. And the idea is that we're always going to try to improve on this, but we have to start somewhere. And right now, I think because it's a critical component of what we do every day, and because it's so inefficient and variable, I think it's a great project to tackle as a group. So we will talk about this more, but that's going to be kind of the next step in terms of trying to standardize and figure out what's the best way to do rounds. Think about it. Something we do every day, yet we do it the way we do it because that's the way we did it before. But nothing's really thought about how can we make it more efficient. And when I say efficient and add value, it's not only add value to the patient. It's add value to the people who are trying to learn, add value to the families, add value to the nurses, add value to the respiratory therapist. And we're not going to tell you how these rounds will look. I have no idea. The people in this room will tell us how these rounds will look, but we'll follow methodology to get there, and then we'll continuously try to improve it. And I think that this is just an example of one process in medicine that is ripe for standardization and for improvement because nobody's ever thought about why we do it the way we do it and how can we do it better. So in summary, I think we covered a lot of, I think, important concepts. We talked about the current healthcare environment. That's the why. I think that all of you would agree that things are changing and that we want to be reactive, we want to be proactive instead of reactive, and that we have to find a different way or a better way of doing things. But that's true for everything in life. You have to evolve or you die, right? And it's not, I mean, the strongest or the smartest who actually are successful. It's those who are able to adapt to change the best. We talked about the what, or what are we going to use. And again, lean is not a magical prescription. It's hard work. It's basically using a scientific method and changing the way you focus on your work, understanding that you take care of the patient, but you also try to figure out how can I do that better. And it's really about identifying waste and eliminating it, creating value for the important customers that we have, whether it be the patient, the family, our learners, our nurses, our respiratory therapists. We have to understand what's valuable for them, and we have to understand that there's probably better ways of doing what we're doing right now. And ultimately, it's really, like I said, a journey, but when you get there, you really function as a high-functioning team, and that's what we want. And finally, I talked about the lean ICU, which is what we're going to do here at Cooper. So this is not just a fad or something that administration has told us that we need to do. I mean, they're obviously trying to implement lean in Six Sigma and other areas of the hospital. And part of that has been training people, and I was one of the first people trained, one of the 3 physicians that was trained a couple years ago. But I think that also they're asking us for results, and people who I think have not thought about this or are not familiar have thought that maybe the best way of getting results is firing some people, and that has happened in other divisions. We really believe that because our opportunity is so huge, we can really make a dent on that needle and have tremendous results for our patients, for our healthcare system, and more important also for our own satisfaction. So I think that I'll finish with one of my favorite quotes from Berwick that says that every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. So when we lose a patient that left the ICU, it's not the people, it's the system. When we operate on the wrong side, it's not the people, it's the system. And over again, when you find problems, errors, waste, it's not the people, it's the system. So we have to think of systems that create value for us, for our patients, and for our other stakeholders.